A Real Need by William Sansom. My uncle lived in a black and white house in a wet green dell. Black timbers, black as trees in the rain, held plaster white as dry chalk, and on either side there rose steeply banked the fields of high green grass. There were no flowers, only green, and against it the black and the white. In one green paddock my uncle kept a black and white cow, which stood all day in the field declaring its camouflage sharp against the green. It was a coincidence that my uncle was also a cleric, and although very poor and very old, kept his white collar shining clean and his black suit brushed. He was so old, or he had drifted so long in the shadow of his prayers, that his face and his bald head were quite white too. So you see how it was, when I spent that long dull June with my uncle. Confined for hours to my chair in the garden, I could only stare at the white sky, this endless green, and at these several close incursions of black and white. Incursions. They were more like stances, declamations, eruptions caught in the act. How freshly young green shines under a low white sky. How still the house and the cow stood. How slowly across the green lawn my uncle moved on his old black legs. I sat there trying to remember how a flower looked, or a blue sky. I played with coloured picture books. I looked for a long time at my own pink hand. But the others, the green and the black and the white, were too powerful. They were everywhere, with the sun glowing bright as a medical lamp behind its lens of white cloud. You will know something of what must have come over me that afternoon with my uncle. I had begun by then to theorise. At one time I began thinking how black and white were not colours at all isolated in this way before me, and that this green with a light inside it was almost not a colour too. It was more a kind of vegetable force breeding and shining and creeping all about. And what is needed, I thought, and I began to study my uncle's face more intently. He was standing a few yards away. I looked him carefully up and down. His black suit had shape to it. I saw where parts of him protruded and parts fell cavernously in. I saw his white collar and his white wrinkled neck above it. I saw his old face moveless in thought, its curdled paste of skin, its eyes blank beneath heavy lids of his dark old age, its moulding of bone and its white pouches sagging like sacks out of spirit jars, and the benign white dome newborn above. All at once the motion came to me. This man is full of red. Inside, he's red. You know, I tried hard to forget this. I invented games, rigmaroles of paper and pencil, countings and postures, to divert that thought. I took more exercise than was permitted. I limped hard for periods excessively long, in order that the very pain in my foot might relieve this new pain in my mind. I tried to wheedle my way into the dark of the house, from which I was soon ejected, for the doctors had prescribed not only rest but air, by my uncle himself, so that in that way too I was brought face to face in too literal a manner with my thought. Soon, even at night, in bed, in the dark, far away from the green and the black and the white, I lay awake, thinking only of the red. Such matters must find their outlet. And one afternoon I could no longer bear it. Strong passions seized me. I determined to root the red out of that black and white old man. I went for him with a bread knife. It is curious to see that this happened inside, in the dining room to be exact, not out in the green at all, so that at least must prove that the thought had grown stronger than its cause. And curious too that I could realise easily, as with a second mind, the ordinary still nature of the room in which this happened, the dark overmantel of the sideboard with its single apple in a bowl, the sense of time hanging over our cold luncheon, the calm light, dusting old fabrics, old framed photographs fading into the wall, And if anyone thinks that life in such circumstances changes, brightens, or disappears, or unbalances itself, they are wrong. It remains the same, only more noticeably the same. I was standing behind Uncle by the breadboard. His head was nodding at his cold mutton, as if he were talking to it, or talking to the pieces, for he always chopped his food first, and then took the fork in his right hand. I remember so well his right hand with the fork raised, and his other hand stretched out on the tablecloth to the left, crumbling a piece of bread. Old people can eat with such indifference. We've all tired time to spare to spin the precious dining hours longer. He was reflected in a mirror opposite, though his head was bowed, and I could not see his face, nor did I want to. I took the knife suddenly from the loaf of bread. It was in the middle of cutting a slice, and in a second I held it over him, pointed like a dagger. I saw that it was one with saw edges. With pleasure, with excitement, with the utmost careful concentration, I placed the blade exactly along the centre of his clean white dome, and began to saw. At the first touch my uncle reached a little forward, as though he had fallen asleep, or as though he had suddenly noticed a black fly which was strolling the rim of his white plate. I suppose really that was the moment he died. His heart would have come to a stop. I went on sawing. It was no easy matter. I knew that from the beginning, and already I had to steady the head with my left hand, but I kept on trying, and watched with some impatience and disappointment, for at first there was indeed a pinkiness, but then it all became a mess. You could have called none of it red, certainly not in the light of that old room, certainly not the red I was after. As soon as I had looked at it, and looked up again in my helpless disappointment, and in doing so saw my movement in the mirror opposite, the mirror set in the great dark sideboard, my heart again bounded with joy. I saw hope. I saw the bright end to all misfortune. I ran stumbling round the chairs. I could hear them falling behind me like fragments of a past life, and standing before the mirror I went at my own throat. It was lovely. The red came bounding out to meet my thankful eyes. It came so easily, so brightly, so bravely blazing its colour that in simple admiration I had to stop. I stopped, with my throat only half cut. There was no need for more. I sank to my knees sobbing thankfulness, and through hands clasped in a sort of prayer, I looked again. But now there was no mirror. I saw only the black wooden face of the sideboard. I was down on the carpet. It was appalling, but I knew I had not really been robbed. I was just on my knees below the mirror. However, so that it might never happen again, I got to my feet. It was beginning to hurt now dreadfully, and with a last glad glance in the mirror, I stumbled out through the doors onto the green, and away down to the garden gate, to the lane, my hands so richly red against the green, and with the memory of my lovely red throat. And you know, I was so glad it was mine. I suppose it was this sudden bright red, that so unsettled the foresters coming down the hill towards me. I am sorry they were so obviously put out. I can only suppose that they who led their lives so deep in the green may have been dazzled quite hurtfully at the sight of all my red. Now I am quieter, and in my new grey home. I can see that such matters can be overdone. Too much is too much, and now I can even find great and subtle pleasure in the colour, the blueness shining from what may be first thought black, of the uniforms of my new friends with their priestly blue domes.